Okay, welcome back. The next realm we have to cover is sub-Saharan Africa. And essentially what that means, it is Africa south of the Sahara. So in the introduction to North Africa, we discussed a little bit about how there's a geographic split between the northern edge of Africa, a massive barrier in between the Sahara Desert, and now we're covering the things that are south of the Sahara. And it's the countries, a number of countries included here. Don't forget to know all of the concepts, ideas, and terms from the chapter. And let me just show that a little better with a map of the subregion. So this area here, kind of highlighted in red, is the transitional zone that lies between North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, or Africa south of the Sahara. And we will, towards the end, take a closer look at some of their subregions, including West Africa, East Africa, Equatorial Africa in the middle, and then Southern Africa. And Madagascar is kind of different. We'll mention a little bit about it separately. As mentioned before, you have two divisions going on. One, environmental. So here we have the Sahara Desert up here, and this part where it starts to turn green, some of it seasonal here, some of it green throughout the year here. This is this greener part, and to the south is what we call sub-Saharan Africa. The boundary between the Sahara and sub-Saharan Africa is a grassland zone called the Sahel. The Sahel is a wide band of grassland that lies to the south of the Sahara. And it's Arabic for shore, means the southern shore of the Sahara. And another dimension that divides north and south is also cultural divides, including religion. This is a figure from the previous chapter showing an area called the Islamic Front. This is sort of the division between the Islamic world in the north, in North Africa, and a transition to the non-Islamic world in the south. So where the countries are red, these are where you have high majority of people who are Muslim. The ones in pink are slight majorities. The ones in this sort of darker brownish color are kind of a mix with fewer than half. And then as you get further south, that Islam becomes a distinctly minority religion. Just for geographic reference, this is from a different textbook, so the countries are a little different, but generally speaking, this area of sub-Saharan Africa, this shows where it is in terms of latitude in relation to the United States. So the area that we're talking about is generally much farther south than anywhere of the United States. It extends over the equator, down into through the tropics, down to this is about as far south as maybe Southern California is north in the southern tip of Africa. A little bit about the physical geography. It sits on the African plate, which one thing about it, if we compare the African plate to the South American plate has a lot of subduction going on, meaning that there is one plate being pushed under South America, creating the Andes mountain range. This is something we discussed in a previous chapter. Africa is a little bit different in that it's not being pushed against, but rather it's being pulled apart. And for some context, it's helpful to kind of see where Africa was earlier on when the continents were merged into one called Pangaea. And in the early days of Pangaea, Africa sat at the heart of Pangaea. And Africa is kind of the last remnant of Pangaea. What happened is that the other continents drifted away, and they drifted away from Africa. And during that time, there was a lot of pressure on Africa to split apart into smaller pieces that it since resisted. But the remnants are that there's a lot of sort of pulled apart areas, including these rifts. These rifts are part of Africa where the crust is continuing to be stressed and pulled apart. And because of that, the nature of the mountains in sub-Saharan Africa is different than it is in places like South America. rather than having volcanic mountains, we have a series of plateaus and basins. Plateaus are like the Colorado Basin Plateau in Arizona, where the Grand Canyon is. These are uplifted but relatively flat areas rather than very jaggedy mountains. So, and we have escarpments, sort of the edges of those mountains. And we also have rift valleys. And rift valleys are the parts where the crust is literally being stretched apart slowly over time. So here's a closer view of that. You have these basins, which are the lower areas, interspersed by these plateaus, which are the higher areas. So it's almost like a set of stairs going up from the plateaus down to the basins. And then we have these deep rifts along the east side of Africa. Now these rifts, there's a rift right here between the Arabian Peninsula and Africa. And over time, this has gotten wider and wider, so wide that the ocean has flowed in. If we go back to Pangaea, there was a rift that developed between North Africa and North America, which has grown so wide, it's now an ocean wide, like the Atlantic Ocean. So these are sort of baby rifts that haven't gotten to that point yet. Here's a view of a landscape in Africa. If you'll notice, these are mountains, but they're sort of kind of like a green Grand Canyon in some ways. You can see there are layers of rock. These are called plateaus, sort of relatively flat on top with steep sides. Here's an image from a physical geography textbook showing the East African Rift Valley. And in a rift valley, rather than plates being pushed together, plates are being pulled apart. And this creates a widening rift where the land will actually drop in elevation, forming a linear low area called a rift valley. This is an extreme example of an escarpment, one of these edges of a plateau where you have an extreme drop in elevation. So one side effect is that many rivers in Africa are not as well navigable as they are in places that are flat and low like Europe because of these extreme drops in elevation. There are high volcanic mountains, and rather than being a long range like the Andes Mountains, these tend to be large singular volcanoes, in some way similar maybe to a volcano one might find in places like Hawaii. These are large singular volcanoes like Mount Kilimanjaro here. And you can see there's actually snow on top because of the high elevation, where it's a relatively warm savanna environment in the foreground. So here's another view of it. Warm, grassy area in the front, high volcanic plateaus. In fact, it's so high, there's actually snow on top in the background. Climate-wise, we talked about the B climates in the last lectures in North Africa and Southwest Asia. And here we transition into the A climate. So below the area of yellow, we're getting into the A climates, tropical rainforest type climate in the middle, savanna, which is a bit drier type along the edge. And then as we get to the south, you go back into some of the B climates or dry climates again. And we actually have C climates, a Mediterranean climate, right at the very tip in South Africa. And this gives us a more tropical type of environment. Again, desert in North Africa, which transitions into savannas, which are sort of tropical but grassy areas, tropical rainforest, a mix of savanna and forest in the middle, a little bit of desert in the corner. And if we look at the distribution of tropical rainforest and savanna in the world, this is the Amazon, which is the biggest one. We have a fairly large area of rainforest in Africa, but then it's surrounded by this large area of savanna. So savannas, which kind of look like this, these are areas that are not densely forested like a rainforest, but rather sparsely forested and open grasslands. These are home to a lot of the large wildlife that we find in Africa.